Good day guys, and welcome to episode 110 of the Teacher Emilio podcast. Some of you asked, hey teacher, make a part 2, talk a bit more about Japan. We really liked the previous episode, so big thank you for your support and for your feedback. I am beyond pleased and happy and excited. It is incredible that some of you come and tell me, hey Emilio, after listening to the last episode, now I feel like going to Japan. So I think it is, incredible, beyond what I expected. And for today's episode, I thought, okay, maybe we could talk a bit about some reverse culture shocks that I have had. And this is more when it comes to speaking, because obviously I am not expecting that from this video, that from this podcast episode, you come here and then come back and tell me, Emilio, now I feel like learning Japanese, or now I feel like learning this other language. However, I do want you to perhaps feel motivated and tell yourself, look, I want to keep polishing my speaking, I want to keep improving in my skills, and hopefully, that is one of the biggest things that you might get from this episode. I just started mentioning culture shock and a reverse culture shock that I have had on this trip, and I also tell you this not so much to show off or to brag or to flex or any of that, but it's more just to tell you a bit about my experience when it comes to learning Japanese, a language that is so different from English and Spanish. And interestingly enough, on this trip, I am so pleased to tell you that finally, in all my interactions, or compared to when I was learning Japanese, a lot of the times it is very common that people tell you something like, oh, Nihongo jousu desu ne, which is like saying your Japanese is really good. And it is a praise, and it is supposed to be a nice phrase. Yeah, and it is, but if you have been learning Japanese, or perhaps a difficult language, or let's just say a language from Asia, it is a phrase that sometimes may not be as good to hear, because after putting a lot of years and effort into learning Japanese, and the same thing could be said about any other language, right? That you have practiced so much, and then just to give you context, like right now I am polishing my academic Japanese, trying to learn words like therefore, in addition, additionally, and I'm trying to increase my vocabulary, right? To go from something to buy into, instead of saying to buy, to say to purchase, and then from saying to purchase to say to acquire. So this is basically my challenge as of right now, for those of you who have not been following the podcast. And I want you to imagine that as a tourist, imagine that situation, and imagine that as a tourist or as someone who is having a conversation, I don't mind if people tell me, oh, your Japanese is amazing, but if I'm ordering at a restaurant and I say something like, oh, can I please have 2 karages, like, the Japanese fried chicken. It is nice if someone tells me, oh, your Japanese is great, but a part of me is also like, I feel that I passed this stage long time ago. Obviously, people who tell you that, they don't know that. But what I'm trying to say is, at least for me, right? This is just for Emilio. If someone tells me, oh, your Japanese is great, I think it is obviously nice. We all eventually like a praise here and there. And in my case, at least for me right now, if someone praises me, I would like it. Maybe I'm getting too picky, but it would be nicer, I should say, if it is because I say a difficult word. And a good example could be one time, I'm very excited to tell you this, but this is not a recent story, but a long time ago, I would say a few years ago, I remember just telling my father-in-law a word, I think it was like historically or biologically, which maybe in English they don't sound that difficult, but when I said this in Japanese a few years ago, as a foreigner, etc., I remember like his face going like, wow, you know that word, that's amazing. And that is maybe, I guess, the type of praise that you would like to see or hear, at least in my experience. Imagine, to give you more context, imagine some of you listening to the podcast right now, and imagine you're in Australia, it could be in any city. Let's say that you go and order a coffee, and then you say, oh, can I please have a latte? And imagine someone tells you, wow, your English is incredible. And maybe a part of you is like, come on, I just got, or I'm preparing for IELTS 6 or 7. Ordering a coffee, there's nothing wrong with ordering a coffee, but it's more like you are not at that level, you're not a tourist anymore. So that's like a mini battle that I have had, and it is a cultural difference. Obviously, you know, if you put things in perspective, there are not that many foreigners who learn Japanese, and Japanese people are not used to seeing that many foreigners, you know, like statistically speaking. So it does make sense that if they see a guy from South America, although everyone thinks I'm from, I don't know, Europe or or America, the US, that's okay, you know, I don't mind. But anyways, that's just like a little example. But all this long intro just to tell you that right now, people don't tell me that much, oh, your Japanese is great. And I think that is good. And I guess what I want to tell you with this first part of the episode is that I guess something we should achieve is, or that I would recommend people to strive for, is to not getting that praise. I guess not getting a praise means that you are at a level where you're advanced already, or you're like at a good intermediate to advanced level, or where people at least acknowledge that, wow, this person put a bunch of effort, so it is not necessary to say that because I can recognize that. I hope that it is coming through the right way, but don't worry because I have a few examples. I'm not going to only use Japanese for this. Look, and when it comes to not receiving a praise, I have another example that perhaps will make a bit more sense. And this goes mainly for my Latinos, right? And I think it doesn't matter if you are or not Latino, but from a Spanish speaker's perspective, I want you to imagine that you are from whatever country that speaks Spanish, right? And then you go to another country. In this case, let me use myself as an example. I remember when I was gonna say last year, but it's actually in 2023. When I visited different countries in South America, I went to Peru, to Bolivia, to Brazil. So I'm gonna use Peru and Bolivia as an example. When I was there, right, as a Venezuelan, right, no one ever said to me, oh, your Spanish is amazing. Obviously, people would listen to me and they will probably tell, you are not from here, or you are not from Peru, or you're not from Bolivia. Maybe you are from, I don't know, this or that country, which is, you know, the superpower that we Latinos have, where we look at someone and we are like, look, bro, or sister, I don't know exactly, I cannot say where you're from, but as soon as you open your mouth and speak in Spanish, I will know, right? So imagine that you go to any country as a Latino, right? And then someone else tells you, oh, your Spanish is amazing. That would feel so strange because a part of me would be, well, of course my Spanish is good because, you know, I grew up learning Spanish and my whole life I lived in a Spanish-speaking country. I'm from Venezuela. It'll be weird. At least I will feel a bit strange. It's like, yes, of course my Spanish is good, you know? And the same thing might happen to you. I don't know. Let me know in the comments. Let me know on social media. What do you think? How would you feel if you go to any country? Since I am Venezuelan, I'm going to use my example. Imagine you come to Venezuela on a holiday, right? And then you are ordering food, whatever, and then someone tells you, oh my God, your Spanish is amazing. How would you react? What would you reply to them? Let me know in the comments. And obviously, look, I think the tricky thing here is that obviously, you know, from Latino to Latino, it is easier to tell. Obviously, like if someone looks at me, obviously people don't expect me to speak Japanese, and I get it. And I'll come back with that. I'll come back and give you another example that was quite funny in a very interesting way. And then another reverse shock that I had, or that I noticed, and this is why I'm telling you that it is good to focus on improving your speaking skills, and this is probably like the first motivational hit, is this, that one of the times that I was told in the trip, like, oh, your Japanese is great, the person instantly, in like a few seconds, just reverted back and just treated me like a normal person, right? Without praising me or anything. And basically what happened was this. Let me give you context. I'm with my wife at a souvenir shop in Japan, and because she is Japanese and she's with me, obviously there is a high chance that I don't speak Japanese. We already know that, okay? So we are looking at a souvenir for my brother, and there are a few flavors, right? And we are deciding which flavor we should get. And she says, look, I think we should get this flavor. And then I'm looking at it and thinking, look, Japan is well known for having different products in different places, right? So I thought maybe we should get him the flavor from the city where I was, or where we were, sorry, which is called Matsuyama. in Ehime Prefecture. So for those of you that are interested in going to Japan, I highly recommend it. And that city is well known for oranges, right? So I say maybe we should get him the orange flavor. My wife was picking something more traditional like green tea. We ended up getting both. But in the process of deciding, she looked at me, she looked at the product, and then the lady at the store, she came to my wife and told her, look, this is quite good, the one she was holding. And then they started having a mini chat, you know, nothing crazy. But then I said to her in Japanese, maybe we should get orange because because in the city we have oranges. Instantly, the store lady, she looked at me a bit surprised, probably like around our age, you know, like around, let's say mid-30s, I don't know. She could be anywhere between 20 and 45, but let's just say that she was quite young, yeah? So as soon as I said that, oh, maybe we should get oranges, she looked at me and said, oh my God, your Japanese is great. So she said the phrase I told you before, oh, Nihongo jousu desu ne. And then I tried to reply the most Japanese ways possible. So I did like this and I said, no. I still make a lot of mistakes. And as soon as I said that, she changed from, oh my God, your Japanese is fantastic, to treating me like a normal customer. And then she went, oh, yeah, actually that flavor is also quite good. And then I just asked her, like, is this like really sweet? How is it? And she replied to me just the same way that she replied to my wife, which was an indirect praise, which was quite good. I think that for the most part, obviously every person is different, but as I was telling you before, probably we want to get to that point where people are not praising you all the time. Of course, a praise here and there is good, but not receiving a praise, just like in the previous example in South America, it may mean that you are already quite fluent and that your skills are really good. And obviously there is always something to improve, there is always something to polish, right? But getting to that stage where you probably get that acknowledgement from native speakers or from locals, that is just unreal in my opinion. And again, I couldn't keep making this episode about stories, and there is one more that I have for you. It's actually like 2 in 1. So this one is more about English and about Australia, so I'm telling you a bit about Japanese. I told you one example with Spanish, but now obviously, since I'm an English teacher, I'll give you one using English and using myself as an example, as the guinea pig. Here we go. So the example with English, if you have been following the podcast, this will be a good test. Let me know in the comments if you know these examples, because I have used one of them before and I hope that you remember. If not, very good, because then we start fresh with new examples for those of you that are checking out this for the first time. So I am based in Melbourne. I have been living in Melbourne my whole time in Australia. And as you can listen to me, right, I don't sound like, yeah, good man, how you going? I don't speak like that, and not all Australians use that twang, right, that way of speaking. So I go to Brisbane to a conference, right, and then as I am talking to someone there, someone asked me, hey, where are you from? And my default answer, as you already know, my default answer is, I am from Venezuela, right? That's what I think 99% of people from a country overseas would say, right? So I said, oh, I'm from Venezuela. Then this person came up to me and said, no, I mean, where are you from in Australia? And that was like, when you have a calculator and then you press and it says syntax error, or when you had like the computer screen and boom, it goes all blue. I went blank for like a second thinking, what? I mean, people never ask me where I am from in Australia. People ask me where I'm from my country, So I was like, oh, I'm from Melbourne. And instantly, this person, obviously like the interaction didn't go sideways or anything. We were having a nice chat. This is quite important to mention this because this is one of the points I want to make in this episode. We're having a good chat, right? And then, where are you from? I'm from Venezuela. No, where are you from in Australia? Emilio has a mini shock. And then I reply, I am from Melbourne. And this person from Brisbane or from Brizzy said to me, oh, Melbourne, the foodie, the coffee, blah, blah, blah. And let me tell you, from someone who is not Australian yet, and I have been in Australia for a long time, a part of me felt like, yeah, I'm from there, mate, yeah. So that's, I guess, something that I don't know. Maybe in some things I said, maybe that person from Brisbane picked it up. And I guess it is something that we would like to achieve, like getting to that point where, you know, I'm not saying, oh, you have to hide your accent or anything along those lines, but perhaps getting to that point where you have those deeper interactions instead of, oh, your English is amazing, how long have you been in Australia? I would much rather be asked, where are you from in Australia? And then I could say the same answer. Sorry, how long have you been in Australia? And then maybe a bit of a praise, or like, where do you live in Australia? And then you get that. In my opinion, I think that will probably lead to a better interaction. And I'll give you a few tips on the things that we can do, that you can do, or things that I have done at least that helped me to get to that stage. Before I do that, there is one last one, and it is basically one time when I was visiting one of my best friends in the US, in Seattle to be very specific, and I had this reverse culture shock because what happened was I was asked like, I was asking one of his friends, right, who's obviously American. This guy's like, oh, cool, man, you came from Australia, welcome to America, super friendly, you know. And then in one of the chats, I just said to him, oh, bro, I just told him, chuck it in the bin, which is very normal in Australia, and probably you know this, right? And then he looked at me a bit confused, like, dude, what do you mean? And then I said, joking to this guy, look, let me tell you in your language, please put it in the trash can or put it in the garbage. And then he started laughing, and then after I said chuck it in the bin, he made a joke because I was surrounded by Americans and my friend and wife as well. And he's just like, oh man, he's really from Australia, dude, did you hear that? And then that became a bit of like a joke. So it isn't a reverse, you know. As someone who learned English as a second language, normally we say, oh, I want to sound, you know, because we have so much influence from the US. And then it's like, oh, you want to speak well, like water, corner, all these, like the R's, getting the pronunciation right. Now that I have been in Australia for so long, and Australia is my home now, without noticing, I have been picking up things from Australia, and people notice that too. So it is quite good, and I encourage you to polish your skills and to basically aim or strive to get to that point where maybe you have deeper conversations or deeper interactions because of this. And I'll tell you some of the things that I have done that have helped me to do that in both English, Japanese. And this is not necessarily a you must do this, but rather me sharing my experience. Hopefully you can take something good from this and maybe apply it into your English learning, or perhaps you can share this with someone, or even you could use it but for a different language that is not Japanese. So probably the first thing that I would recommend is just learning about the country that you're in, or the culture / country of that language that you want to speak. A lot of you guys are probably in Australia, or you want to improve your English. You might be in America or in England, the UK, etc. But let's imagine with Australia, right? Something that is quite easy where you can get a lot of conversation could come from food and drinks. So it could be as simple as coffee or tea, or even not even just that, like think of things like Vegemite, fairy bread, Weet-Bix. I think there is a lot of chances for us as non-Aussies or non-English native speakers to practice with Australians and basically use that as a way to talk about different things, and that could be a good opening. So for example, it is well known, or let's say that everybody says, or for most international students, let's say, people that are not Aussies don't like Vegemite, for the most part. Unless you're like Emilio and you're a bit crazy and you eat Vegemite with carrot, for example. So I would go and talk to Aussies and mention that, like, oh, I love Vegemite. And then I get a bit of a reaction, like, how come, mate? Like, because people don't like Vegemite. And I say, yeah, you know, but it's a bit salty, it's apparently healthy, da-da-da. And then that's already like a gateway to talk about something about Australian culture that most people know about. And I'm not saying that you always have to say something different, but the examples I'm going to be using are probably like the opposite of like what most people say. But it could be, for example, with Vegemite, that could be one good in Australia. I know that with Japanese I did that too when it comes to talking about food. So there is a food that is fermented beans that are very like gooey, so you have to like mix them and eat drips, and people don't really, if you're not Japanese, you maybe won't like that dish, and that dish is called natto. And maybe I'm lucky because it is maybe an acquired taste. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you like natto. and what I would do is basically just eat that when I'm in Japan, when I'm not in Japan. One time I didn't know, and I was in the bullet train, I was on the bullet train, and then I was eating those fermented beans. Something that Japanese people say is that those beans are quite smelly, not in a bad way, but it's got a particular smell, and if you open it, people around you can tell. When I was on that train, a lot of people were looking at me, but I thought maybe they just look at me because I'm different, because I'm a tourist, I don't look like I'm from Japan, you know. But then when I said that to Japanese people, everyone starts laughing, or they have a bit of a shock because they say, no, you shouldn't do that because everyone around you is gonna smell that, that's not that good. So it is a good opening, it's a good conversation starter, it is something that you can say to basically, I guess, engage in more deeper conversations. And I guess my last example that comes from Australia, or even in general, has to do not only with dishes, or not only with foods, it could also be with sports. Like, I come from a country where people play baseball. I know very little to nothing of cricket, and what I do when I'm talking to Aussies is I try to make comments about cricket or something about the things that they like, and I say, oh look, cricket is quite tough, but I'm getting my head around it, it's a bit tricky. And usually, like, people go, oh, cricket, nice, like this person is interested in my country, this person is interested in my culture. I think if we achieve that, then we are one step closer to having those deeper conversations. And look, on that same note, another important tip is this: whenever you're talking about something from a country, whatever that thing may be, right? I'm not saying that you always have to like praise things, but try to keep it positive. That's at least what has worked the most for me. I never go to Australia and saying like, oh, I hate Vegemite, it's awful, or anything along those lines, because while I may not love Vegemite as much as they do, what I do to tell myself is, or what I want you to think about is this, and I tell this to my students in class. Imagine someone goes to your country, you are showing them a dish, or maybe they tried one of your favorite dishes for your whole life, and then you go and this person comes and tells you this sucks, this is terrible, whatever it may be, right? Like, for example, let's say with my Venezuelan and Colombians, I'm not gonna talk about the arepa debate for now, but imagine someone has an arepa and tells you, look, to be honest, I don't really like arepas, I don't like the flour. It doesn't matter what people say after that, but if they say, I don't like arepas, a part of you is like, are you crazy? Are you out of your mind? Or maybe, I don't know, you might be from Peru and someone tells you like, oh, I really don't like ceviche because I don't like raw fish, but then I eat sushi, I don't know, right? Or maybe you're from Mexico and someone says, look, I don't really like tacos because of whatever the reason may be, and it's just like almost like a default. As soon as you start like saying something bad from the very beginning, I don't think that's that good. What could happen though is that as you start talking, people may say negative things about anything, and then that's okay, then you can comment. And it could be, again, a good example of this could be when I was talking a bit about life in Tokyo, and I remember talking to different people and I just made this comment like, oh, life in Tokyo would be nice, but oh my god, imagine the train. And then it's not me, it's other people saying, oh yeah, the train is always very busy, ta-da-da. And then you are like indirectly saying something that is not necessarily bad, but you are not saying like, oh, trains in Tokyo suck because I hate this feeling, because then, I don't know, I think when it comes to practicing our speaking skills, then it is better to keep things in more of a positive / neutral tone so that we can get more from that interaction. Another thing that I would highly recommend if you want to improve your speaking skills is to be curious. Just as we said in the previous note, talking about things that relate to the country / culture that you want to learn, or in the language that you want to practice. On the same note, I think being curious will help, because then you can take conversations to another level where you can practice more, and then when you get into the next point, which I'll say in a second, and by doing that, you get to practice, you get to hear more, and you also learn. I truly believe that in my journey of learning different languages, in this case again focusing mainly in English and in Japanese, I have had so much more practice just by asking people their opinions. Like, oh, or it could be how to do something, for example. It could be as simple as that. In Venezuela, we don't have a culture of drinking tea like people do in Australia, so I would ask friends or people in Australia like, oh, how do you drink this tea, or how much water, how much milk should you put? It could be something very simple, but then you get lots of practice from those, even from those little things. And again, the same thing could be something that you might do. I remember that one time I got not only lots of practice, but I ended up going to a cricket match with someone who was at the same gym when I was working out, just because there was a TV, there was a cricket match, and I just said to this guy like, mate, what's happening? I've got no idea. And then I basically had like a mini cricket class. And then this guy, super friendly by the way, started telling me how cricket works, this and that. And I think even himself, like after meeting him for a few times, he just said, mate, we should go and watch a cricket match. I think you would like it. And then I said as a joke, look, I've never been to a cricket match, which is true. But then I said, look, cricket with an Australian, the only thing I have to do is to get a meat pie. That is like the most Australian thing I can do. And then he said, let's do that and some KFC. And the rest is history, because we did go to a cricket match. I had an amazing time. So you just never know what can happen when you are curious. Maybe another thing could be, and another tip is, maybe this is for someone who maybe is a bit more shy. I normally do this a lot in restaurants, and it is as simple as asking people for their opinion. So when you're looking at a menu, someone may say to you, oh, what would you like to have? And I always reply back with, what would you recommend? I'm quite hungry. What dish would you recommend? And sometimes that answer, sometimes just asking that can give you so many different answers. And you often, or in my case, I often get really good recommendations, or we can talk about dishes. Or even I just say, hey, look, I'm between this and this. What do you think? What would you recommend? What do you think it's better? Which one would you have? Any of those questions will work great. At least they have worked well for me. So copy them, and let's see if they work for you as well. The same thing could be said when it comes to clothing, right? For example, on this trip when I was in Japan, I bought my first jean jacket, and I'm quite excited because I normally don't buy that many clothes, but that's a completely different story. And I noticed that when I bought it, looking back, I asked a bunch of questions. Well, because one, I have never bought it. Two, it is obviously my personality. But again, if I'm thinking of someone, or as a person who wants to practice Japanese, I think that without noticing, by just asking him, hey, how should I wash this? How should I take care of it? What would you recommend? All of those questions that I asked led to, a good 10 to 15 minutes of speaking practice, which may not be like the most, let's say, it's not like a full speaking class, and it doesn't have to be, but it's just practice. And practice piles up, and that's what we want. We want to pile up with a bunch of practice so that we can improve our skills. And then the last thing that we have to do has to be getting lots and lots of listening practice, because with listening practice, what we are doing is basically we are getting not only listening, but it could also be like a mini practice in terms of pronunciation. It could also be practice in terms of increasing our vocabulary. It could also be that opportunity to review some of the things that we already know. And no listening, no improvement, or very little improvement. This is one of the reasons why I made this podcast, or why I'm making these videos for you guys, because ideally, the more listening you get, the more you can practice, the more you can review. And it depends at what stage you are, but maybe for some of you it might be like amazing practice. For some of you, maybe this podcast is going to be, let's say, a more relaxed practice. And then maybe for others it could be challenging in different parts, right? Or it could just be engaging. At the end of the day, it is practice, because this material is in English. So if you want to learn English, maybe you could combine my podcast with another podcast, or you could basically, depending on your goals, I should say, on your targets, then you could mix this podcast with another podcast, or this podcast with movies, videos, etc., and other strategies. But what I'm trying to say is, without listening, or if you don't get a lot of listening practice, things will be more difficult for you. And when it comes to improving your speaking, trust me, I can say now Melbourne, not because I am a language god, or I am extremely good, or I am talented. No, trust me, I was saying Melbourne for a long time. And after sitting down with a friend from Australia, or like just double checking, how do you say it, man? How do you say it? And then it's like Melbourne. And then I was replying back Melbourne, Melbourne, Melbourne. Then obviously with time and practice you start picking up those things. But obviously when you get a lot of listening practice, two things can happen. Well, one, because I'm telling you, sorry, you might go and say, well, look, now I am getting a lot of listening practice, so my speaking might improve indirectly. But you could also go into your listening practice focused on specific things so that you can improve. And a good example could be when you listen to someone who is from Australia, from New Zealand, or maybe from the UK, right? Someone who speaks with, let's say, British UK English and not American English. You have to focus a bit more, right? Because the way they say certain words, it is a bit more difficult. And this is also the tip I would give you if you say, oh, I want to sound a bit more British. Because, you know, it is quite popular. A lot of people like that accent. So if you don't listen to people from England or the UK or Australia or New Zealand, whatever, it is going to be extremely hard, right? And it applies to anything. I tell this to my students who are from Colombia or South America, I should say, and I usually make it a bit of a joke, but I say, look, people say that the Chileans are like the Scottish when it comes to learning Spanish. Like Scottish is probably like the most difficult English accent, or if it isn't, it is in the top 5, you know, for non-English native speakers. And with the Chilean accent, it is really hard. Even for native speakers in Spanish, sometimes you listen to someone from Chile and you're like, what's happening? You know, you feel a bit lost. But, you know, as an English teacher, I have met so many students from Chile and from many different parts of South America and the world. And the more I listen to them, the more things start to make sense. Obviously, the first time I listened to them, I had no idea what was happening, sort of. But then now that I have met and taught so many people from Chile, it is not so new for me. This is not to say that I'm an expert in their accent or anything, but just being conscious of getting a bunch of volume when it comes to listening practice, it will help you with speaking. I'm not mentioning here reading, because reading is great, but with reading you don't get the pronunciation, and in a language like English, reading practice will obviously help you, but the challenge that you have is that in English, the way you write something is not the same way how you say it, which is what happens with us in Spanish, for example. For example, where the word casa is always casa. The sound CA is 99.9% of the time ca. Whereas in English, it is not always the case, because you have words like though, tough, cough, thought, throughout, thorough, and all of those words, they look very similar. You put like an extra letter and boom, it completely changes. So a bunch of listening, a bunch of volume will definitely help you. And I do think that by getting a lot of listening practice, it will keep things fresh. So when it comes for you to use that language, you'll probably you will not, let's say, not necessarily struggle, but you maybe don't have to think as much because your brain is so used to listening to it. At least this is what happened to me with Japanese, because living in Australia, other than talking to my wife and a few friends, I don't have that many people to talk in Japanese to, and my teachers, of course. So for me, what I do is whenever I'm driving, I like to listen to Japanese radio. Do you have to listen to the radio in English? No, you listen to whatever you want. Nobody knows you better than you. But what I'm trying to suggest is finding something that is interesting for you. In my case, this radio show uses more advanced vocabulary, and it talks a bit about politics, the economy. So it is like more on the advanced or upper intermediate level when it comes to vocabulary. It's not so casual, and that's not what I want. So you might have to adjust based on what you would like. And then I guess my final tip is going to be try and put all of that listening into practice. Don't be shy, or do your best to don't be too shy, and basically just try using those words, or try to basically put all that into practice. Sometimes just not thinking too much about making mistakes, it's ideal. Obviously, I am talking primarily in terms of day-to-day conversations. Of course, I tell my students who are going for IELTS and PTE, you don't want to be doing anything too crazy or too different during the test. The test is not the place to be testing or trying different things or to say a word that you don't know how to use. But when it comes to normal conversations, when you want to double check something, look, it doesn't hurt to just say, look, I have been hearing this word and so many times in English, in Japanese, in Portuguese, in Mandarin, and I can continue with the list, but mainly with those 4 languages. Those are the ones that I have practiced the most for the past, 5-6 years. I have used words purposely, knowing that it is not correct, that is not the word that I should use there, but I have done it just to get the meaning right, to find another word that is more suitable, and also to double check my understanding, because in some cases I have used a word and then I just double check, is this okay? And then someone might say to me, look, it is good, but maybe this word is better. Or maybe the conversation just keeps going, but then I notice that a person says something different, and then I just ask back like, hey, I said this, you said this, are these 2 things the same? And then, yeah, it is the same, okay, cool, and then you just keep speaking. So I guess it is a matter of letting go a little bit, and it is challenging. As you are listening to me, I feel you. I feel the stress and pain of, oh, I want to get everything right. But with language learning, at least in this type of practice, in this everyday type of practice, obviously this is not talking about work, this is not talking about professional settings. In general, you want to do your best to get as much practice. It is okay to make mistakes. And then by doing that, you're going to polish your skills. And with this, I'll say that I'm pretty sure that if you do these things, there is a high chance that you will see improvements in your language learning, because, well, it's been working for me, for my students. And now that I just mentioned the exams, before we go, I have to just remind you that if you know someone who wants to pass IELTS or PTE on 2025, maybe by the time you're listening to this episode, my January course already started. So maybe for February, I'll have another 3-week course where we're going to get a bunch of practice, a lot of materials, and you're not going to be on your own, or your friend will not be on his or her own. I'm going to be guiding them through, showing them what to do, what not to do. And well, with that, I will say big thank you for listening to this episode. Unfortunately, by the time that I watch this or that you watch this, I won't be in Japan. I'll probably be on the plane coming back to Australia, or I'll probably be, I don't know, maybe in Australia already. And it is sad because my holiday is finishing, but at the same time I'm so happy because in terms of culture shock, we had this reverse culture shock. It is always good catching up with friends and family. I had the chance to show Japan to my mom. I am beyond happy. I cannot even put it into words. And it's interesting because I never thought of doing any of this when I started learning Japanese, but you just never know where things can go. This could be also a reminder to, regardless of wherever stage you are, it is always good to take a mini pause and look back to all the things that you have done. And I remember telling this to my father-in-law because we went to a hot spring, and interestingly enough, this hot spring was full of local people and they had such a strong slang. And I'm telling you, like, I felt as if I was in my Japanese testing room. When I listened to my father-in-law talk to him, my father-in-law was okay. So it's probably maybe a similar feeling when you guys, when my friends, when my students listen to me. But maybe I bring a podcast guest and then you're like, oh my God, I really had to focus to listen to understand that person. That happened to me, I'm telling you. I really felt I was doing the Japanese IELTS and PTE, listening to this man, and my brain, I went from being relaxed and having a chat to my brain going like, okay, I have to focus, I need to really pay attention, like twice as much as I normally do. But I could understand it. And I didn't beat myself up because I didn't understand everything, but I remember telling my father-in-law, there are so many times I was studying Japanese in Australia thinking, what is the point of this? Obviously, the point is to eventually, become a translator, keep improving, maybe becoming an interpreter. So it is an extremely high level, right? Which is maybe not what most people will do in a language. But I remember thinking, you have those thoughts. It's almost like the same when you're running or exercising and you say, maybe I should stop here. It was something like that. But then I said to him, I'm so happy that I didn't quit, because of not quitting, I managed to understand about 80% of what this person said, which, to put it in an Australian context, it's almost like the same when you study, when you practice, when you make mistakes, and then you go outside of a big city, you go maybe somewhere in the country where you get like the thickest or like stronger Australian accents, and you talk to someone like, yeah, good man, how you going? And then you talk to them, and like the first time you listen to them, it sounds like blah 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 blah. But maybe this time, because you didn't quit, because you kept going, it's not like you understood 100%, but maybe you understood 70%, maybe you understood 80%, and man, that is so good that there is that improvement. And this is also like a mini reminder, because I tend to be quite tough on myself. Maybe you are tough on yourself too. If you are not, that's okay. And well, thank you so much for joining me on episode 110. I know I didn't touch on too many like cultural nuances with Japan, but I do think that by polishing your speaking, in using these different strategies, we can get more practice. We can basically practice more, we can learn more, and then we can get more from all the interactions that we have. We can obviously, I haven't mentioned that, but it's important to finish up and say that you can also tell people more, you can also share more. So I don't want to make this episode like, oh, you just basically are like a sponge and you just absorb. No, on the same note, when people know and they acknowledge your level and they can see that, you know, you can maintain a conversation, etc., then they could also ask you back different things, and then you can introduce your culture or your perspective, or basically you can just share something with them that maybe they wouldn't know. Like, even though that Australia is super multicultural, I have met people that have never met a Venezuelan, or who maybe haven't met that many Latinos, and they have questions and they want to know. And we could be those, by connecting with them at a deeper level, we could be that person that maybe tells them a bit more about our country, a bit more about our culture, and how beautiful is that? With all that, massive thank you for joining me either here on Spotify or on YouTube or wherever you were. Maybe you were relaxing, whatever was happening with your life. I'm happy that I was part of your life for this episode. I had an amazing time making it for you. I hope you liked it as much as I did. I'll see you in episode 111 when I'm back in Australia. Sending you a huge hug. Miss me, don't miss me too much, because you'll see me next week. And until then, I'll see you on the next episode. Take care and bye for now.